We're live, Chairman.
Kim, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody to this virtual meeting of the Eastern Committee. My name is Paul Rivers and I have the pleasure of chairing this, this committee. Now, following the news of the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, as a mark of respect, I am going to ask this committee to observe a minute's silence in remembrance, and I'll ask Georgina to time us for that and let us know when that is over. So 1 minute silence, please, members.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Georgina. Thank you, members. So I'll start the meeting by asking Georgina to confirm that everybody present are members of the committee. Sorry, Georgina, you're muted.
We've got the members of the committee and our speakers present.
Excellent, thank you. So luckily, I am supported this evening by a whole host of officers. We have Lewis Jones, Planning Solicitor, Beth Howland-Smith, Development Manager, Marie Clark, Area Team Leader, Alex Inglis, Senior Planning Officer, Kate Edwards, Principal Planning Officer, Patrick Arthurs, Planning Consultant, Kimberly Sohn, Democratic Services Officer, who is in charge of all technology this evening. Thank you, Kim. And Georgina, of course, Democratic Services Officer, who is keeping me in control this evening, and us, of course. So just to remind you, members and officers, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak, and mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Please keep your statements brief and to the point, as you will, I'm sure. We will be timing speeches this evening, and an alarm will sound when you have been speaking for 4 minutes. And I'm reminded that there are people who can run a mile in 4 minutes, so that should be plenty of time. If any member loses their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin the meeting. And if the webcast stream fails, then we will adjourn while we reset the connection. Well, that's the precursor. So moving then to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. Georgina, are there any?
None received, Chairman.
Perfect, thank you. And minutes of the last meeting, agenda item number 2. Members, do you have any problems with the agenda? If you have no problems, please indicate by turning your microphones on and saying everything's okay, or putting your thumb up or something like that.
Agreed.
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 Well, I think that's a perfect result. Thank you very much for that. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Georgina, have any been submitted?
None received, Chairman.
Perfect, thank you. And item 4, questions by members of the public. Georgina, have we had any? Councillor Townsend, Liz?
None
You have your
received.
hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to declare
that I'm, for item 8.1, that I am the portfolio holder for economic development, but I wasn't involved in any of the comments that the team submitted towards the application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Georgina, have you got that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So questions by members of the public. Are there any?
There aren't, no, Chairman.
Okay. And questions by members?
None received, Chairman.
Lovely. And now I shall ask for any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since our last meeting, and Beth, who is our very own Wikipedia, can help us with that. Beth, do we have any?
Thank you, Chairman. You're very kind. Just if I could just quickly start by updating the officers who are present. We don't have Marie Clark this evening. We've got Catherine Pearson, who's the area team leader, who deals with the first half of the week, just in case anybody was looking for Marie there. In terms of updates for members, I have an update on the council's 5-year housing land supply. Members will be aware that back in October, we released our housing land supply position statement with a base date of the 1st of April 2020, and it concluded that we had a 5.3 year housing land supply. Many of you may well know that we've recently been through a public inquiry for the Lower Webburn Lane site in Farnham, and during that inquiry we were challenged on our housing land supply position, and we did ultimately concede that we have a 4.99 year supply of housing land. Admittedly, that is very below, very marginally below that 5-year supply, but we consider that the degree of that shortfall is a material consideration, and I would like to assure members that we are keeping this 5-year housing land supply position under constant review, and we are also working on a new position statement with a base date of the 1st of April this year. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Beth. And now 7.1, applications decided under delegated powers. Beth, can you advise us on that?
Thank you, Chairman. In short, unfortunately, due to the new planning database system being rolled out this week, we're not able to produce this for members this meeting, but we will be in a position to update members on it at the following meeting. So apologies for that, Chairman.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Beth. That's fine. Well, members, we move on now to applications subject to public speaking. Our first one tonight is WA 2020-2055, Chewsley Farm in Chewsley Lane, Godalming. This is for a retention of 20 hectares of polytunnels throughout the year, 5.6 hectares heated by heat pumps drawing heat from the on-site reservoir, 14.4 hectares without heating, located in particular fields identified as acceptable on the farm. 40 further hectares of polytunnels to be on site in fields identified as acceptable for polytunnels from the 1st of April until the 31st of October, with the retention of hoops on the further 40 hectares of polytunnels, removing plastic covers only between the 1st of November and 1st of April. So I call on Alice Inglis to help us through this. Alex?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just before we start, as set out on the update sheets, the officer's recommendation for this item has changed to one of deferral. This change is in response to comments received from Natural England, setting out that they have major concerns in relation to the impact on the area of outstanding natural beauty, but they've not been able to provide these comments in advance of this meeting. Officers do believe that it would be in the best interests of all parties to defer consideration of this item until these comments have been received and can be reported to the committee.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Now, members, based on that, and the recommendation, therefore, to defer, I think we can move straight to a vote. And perhaps again, you can say that you are in agreement with the officer's recommendation to defer. If I hear both, then we'll roll into an actual vote. So if you will indicate, members, your agreement or otherwise to the deferral recommendation.
Agreed.
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 Okay, excellent. So I take that recommendation as a deferral to be as agreed. Alex, do we have a view on when this application may come back?
Officers, thank you, Chairman. Officers will be in consultation with Natural England to ensure that we can work proactively with them to ensure they've got everything they need to be able to provide those comments, in as timely a fashion as possible, because we would like to get the item back on the agenda as soon as possible.
Sure.
But yeah, we can't provide a solid date at this time, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Well, Georgina, I think we'll then move on to the next item, which is WA 2021-0184, the Cottage Upper Ifold House, Upper Ifold in Dunsfold. This is a proposal to for a change of use of part of the dwelling to provide an independent dwelling known as the cottage, together with alterations to elevations as amended, as amplified by plans received on the 22nd of February and the 26th of March this year. Kate Edwards, I understand you're able to take us through this.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. If Georgina, I could ask if it's possible to get the presentation. Thank you. So I'll be presenting both the applications together here, as it's a linked application, the application both for planning permission and for listed building consent. So here we can see the site plan. The area in red, although it doesn't show up particularly well on this visual, so apologies for that, but the area in red is the hatched area towards the top of the plan there. And it relates to not the whole of Upper Ifold House, but to the northern part of the building, which it has, I understand, been described as the cottage. The site, Upper Ifold itself, is a very rural area with a quite small cluster of dwellings near to Upper Ifold House. The images you can see here are of Upper Ifold House, which is a very long building, so I'm not able to get the whole of the building within the image, but the upper photo you can see there is from the main parking area to the main house, and as you can see, it's a very fine historic building, which is Grade 2 listed. The frontage of the northern part of the building, which was an extension to the original dwelling which was on the site, is accessed via a independently owned access, so it has currently has an independent parking area to the side of it, and the image you can see there at the bottom is of the existing extension, which was, I think, was completed in the 20s or 30s, so it's certainly not a contemporary build. That image shows the extension, which is single story. And here you can see the thatched cottage, which is the adjacent property to the northern part of the building, and that photograph is taken from within the existing gravel parking area adjacent to the cottage. And here you can see the rear elevation of the building. As you can see, there's already a dividing fence between the main house and the northern part of the building, although that doesn't have, there is no rear boundary subdividing the two plots. So you can see here the single story extension and the dormer window within the roof space just to the side of the single story element is part of the main house currently and would be incorporated into the new independent dwelling, which would be formed within the remainder of the northern part within the single story element, alongside a stairwell within the roof space. So here we can see a block plan, which again shows that relationship between the existing building and the thatched cottage. As I said previously, it's a very rural area accessed via a farm lane. And here we can see the proposed ground floor plan, which shows 2 bedrooms on the ground floor and a new party wall indicated. And here we can see the first floor plan. So the majority of the space shown here to the white floor space shown, the areas to the right hand side of the image would all be within the existing roof space of the single story extension, and the area to the left of the screen, the bedroom, would be created by subdividing an existing bedroom within the main house, which I've visited and has a split level currently. So here we can see changes to the elevations, which are very minor in scale. An existing window on the front elevation would be changed into a doorway. And an existing pair of smaller windows, which are on the rear elevation, will be changed into one larger window. And to confirm, the recommendation for the planning application is that planning permission be granted subject to conditions and informatives. And for the listed building consent application is that listed building consent should be granted. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, but you will have hopefully seen that an update sheet has been produced today in relation to the application, which just updates on noted consultation responses received, as there was an ongoing consultation at the time the report was published. In relation to item 8.2, the application for planning permission, we've received an additional comment from Dunsfold Parish Council. They've indicated they've raised some concerns about discrepancies in the plans, raised a concern about the curtilage provided for the new independent dwelling, and also commented that they feel that there will be an adverse heritage impact to splitting the ownership of the building in terms of future maintenance and in terms of the subdivision. And we've also received an additional representation from a member of the public, which again refers to inconsistencies on the plans, refers to the historic use of the building, stating that it has been ancillary, and refers to shared surfaces between the buildings. And I've provided in the update sheet my comments on those additional representations received. In terms of the plans, there isn't anything there which causes me concern, and I've provided some detail about that. In terms of the lawful use of the existing building, obviously, a variety of information has been submitted with regards to that, and conflictory information indicating both that it's always been ancillary to the main dwelling and that it's been used independently. But for the purposes of this application, it's an application for planning permission for an independent dwelling, so the historical use doesn't need to be established through this application. And it's not something which I comment on here, and it would be something which would need to be established through a certificate of lawful development were there any desire for that to be established. And that brings me to the end of my comments on the additional representations received. And I've also listed within the representation more detail about the changes to the elevations and a statement that doesn't impact on the heritage of the building. So that brings me to a conclusion of the update sheet for the planning application. In relation to the listed building consent application, again, we've received an additional representation here, which is multiple pieces of evidence that the building has been used independently provided by the applicant, but the same comments apply really here from my perspective as an officer. And that's everything on the update sheets. Also to confirm that the recommendation for both items, which was at the time the reports were published subject to the responses received to reconsultation, just to confirm that those recommendations remain unchanged. And that's everything. Thank you very much, Chair.
Well, thank you, Kate. That was a marathon. Just for my sake, Kate, you've covered this application and also the one for following for listed building consent. So we'll take these separately, but you won't make any further comments on the second one. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Georgina, we have some speakers. I have Mr. John Dolden first. Is that correct? John Dolden, over to you,
yes.
sir.
He's present, Chairman. He may have trouble unmuting.
Yes, Mr. Dolden, you're muted, I'm afraid. We can see you but not hear you.
He has sent me a copy of his.
Okay, I have unmuted.
Great. Over to you then, Mr. Dolden. Thank you.
Oh no, I've lost. Oh dear. I've lost my thing. I can't get that to. Oh dear.
That's it.
Sorry, I can't get in. I have a problem. Sorry, excuse me. I can't get to my speech.
That's right, Mr.
You
Dolden.
want me
I
to
believe
read it?
Georgina has a copy.
Sorry,
I have a copy.
I've got it here now. Sorry. Nixon Orban, the applicant, has now put in an application for its annex to become a separate property, despite being granted planning permission because it was an integral part of the listed Upper Ifold house. Permission was given by the committee in October 2020 to extend the annex by about 100%. Now he wants it to be a separate property, the exact opposite, but it is not registered at the land registry as being separate. He seems to have a problem deciding how to extend his annex, now called the cottage. Even when he puts in an application, he likes to alter it and nobody quite knows what the final application will look like. Most of Upper Ifold Hamlet, many from Dunsfold and overall, 45 objections were raised against the original application. A lawyer on the committee wisely suggested that he be tied down with a legal agreement not to attempt to separate the annex from the main house. This motion was narrowly defeated after the planning officer said that he would be unable to ask for separation for at least 3 years. But no temporal condition relating to separation was actually put on the permission. The absurd situation now arises where he puts in a second application to separate off and sell the annex from the main house with a smaller extension, but without dumping the first application. This means a purchaser can then use the prior planning application to make an extension of about 100% instead of the normal 40% allowed. The applicant appears to have abused planning by a backdoor method to sell the annex to family with 100% planning permission. There's also the question that even if the first application be withdrawn and a separate application is made to extend the annex subsequently, what would count as the starting point? Would it be the size of the annex that's sold or the size of the annex now prior to its extension and sale? Dunsfold Parish Council also objected to this new planning application on similar grounds and mentioned that large listed buildings should have ancillary accommodation for staff or guests. They point out that most services are shared with the main house and that no attempt has been made to register separate status with the land registry. The annex has always been ancillary for staff and family. Enforcement officers were sent to the property at the request of neighbours in 2010 and 2013 when Mr St Albin first tried to sell the annex and subsequently let it as a separate building. Rebecca Clark gave him 28 days to apply for separation or reopen connection with main building. I posted her letter to neighbour Mr Smith on the website on March 11th. Please consider the following. 1. The legitimacy of both applications presenting mutually exclusive background information to get each passed. 2. The desire to resurrect the old application allowing 100% development. 3. Desire to isolate and extend, which makes an isolated annex not fit for future purpose as it is, and hence breaches National Policy Framework paragraph 127A. 4. The need to put in a condition to prevent HGVs accessing his property over the only vehicle access, namely the thatched cottage drive, as the need to reverse down this long narrow drive is exceedingly dangerous. Whether, if this is accepted, the previous application should be voided. Whether, if this application is accepted, the baseline size should be established, listed building status put on it with constraints over roof height relative to the main building. I submit that previous permissions be withdrawn or abandoned by the submission of this application. If you must allow this application, please make it a condition that the annex is sold prior to extension to limit its ultimate size. Otherwise, it will become a behemoth overlooking the neighbouring thatched cottage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dolden. I have another speaker, Mr. St Albin, Nick St Albin. Please start, Mr. St Albin.
He's present.
I've just unmuted. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, fine. Thank you very much.
Right, I'll get started right now. We conceived this project in 2019, months before COVID. Its purpose has always been to provide their own home, raised to modern standards, for our daughter, a qualified teacher, and her family, but a home which allows us to coexist and support each other living next door. We sought your approval last September after lockdown, before a second and a third one knocked us off course. With all this uncertainty and delay, we have scaled back our plans to a minimum. So I am sorry to trouble you further, but I hope you will agree this new application is straightforward. There are two strands. First, I respectfully invite the committee to accept the evidence that Upper Eiffel Cottage has often been a separate dwelling. And so that simply reinforces your officer's careful assessment that it meets all your requirements for an independent dwelling. Secondly, we seek your approval to subdivide a spare bedroom in Upper Eiffel House into essential living space for the cottage. Planning conditions, as you all know, should be kept to a minimum. The national framework has 6 tests. They should only be imposed where they are necessary and reasonable. Ancillary use now fails these tests. Last year, we accepted this new restriction in a spirit of cooperation. But then you could give only 2 reasons for it. The first was to allow an assessment of the cottage as an independent dwelling. Your new officer report now provides the positive assessment you needed. And that accords with our evidence. The dwelling has functioned as a lawful independent unit, as your planning officer confirmed 8 years ago. The second reason was to preserve the listed building. And again, the officer report finds that this proposal will preserve it and that it accords with all your policies and will cause no harm. And that the Grade 2 listing will still apply to the cottage. Intergeneration ownership provides a new socially beneficial use for an old building whose original purpose has passed. Our scheme follows Para 79 of the National Framework, which favours isolated schemes in the countryside, which would represent the optimal viable use of a heritage asset, or would be appropriate enabling development to secure its future, or where it would involve the subdivision of an existing dwelling. This is the optimal viable usage. Intergeneration living is the natural next step in the life of this building. It will enable each generation to fund their own works to secure its future. Waverley's new local plan promises to understand and respect significance of heritage assets and target for improvements those vulnerable to risk. No longer at the heart of its own estate, when we arrived in 1999, the house was a stranded heritage asset in decline. We restored the fabric and grounds with 2 decades of investment, a labour of love. But these new plans to modernise the cottage only work if each generation has their own mortgage. For this, we find banks require 2 independent legal titles, 2 mortgages that will fund the scheme, but also cover any future surprises that an old building has in store. Behind ancillary use lay a well-intended sentiment, one we embraced, but it defeats the very purpose of our application, and it can no longer be justified. So tonight, I respectfully request that you please allow our daughter Alice, Ben, and 2-year-old Lara to create the modern space they need to live here with us. A need supported online by 11 members of their generation, a generation we should hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. St Aubyn. Thank you, sir. And I have a third and final speaker, Rupert Jones, who's Dunsfold Parish Council representative. He's the Vice Chairman of Dunsfold Parish Council. Rupert.
Yes,
please.
good evening. Last year, the Parish Council was supportive of the applicant's application WA 2020-0372, despite the substantial opposition to the application from the community in general and the residents of Upper Ifold Hamlet in particular. The Parish Council was influenced by the applicant's desire to enhance the multi-generational use of Upper Ifold House and the enthusiastic acceptance by the applicant and by his daughter of a condition to emphasise no independent use of the annex. As councillors are aware, such a condition was imposed and was accepted by the applicant. Certainly the applicant did not appeal the imposition of that condition on the basis of it being unreasonable. Having discussed this application at 2 parish council meetings, the parish council believes for many reasons that the applicant's proposal will not create a truly independent dwelling. For example, the applicant has stated that not only will the water and drainage systems be shared, which is not unusual, but also the heating system. Indeed, one objector has related that when the annex was let without planning consent, if the applicant went away, he would turn off the central heating, leaving his tenants without heating.
That's nonsense.
Upper Ifold House comprises a substantive estate with an appropriate curtilage and surrounding woodlands. However, the proposed curtilage for the annex as an independent dwelling includes a very small green garden area, particularly when compared with the envisaged parking and hard surfaced areas. As the applicant's objective remains a multi-generational home, clearly his children and grandchildren will continue to use the estate as a whole. But that all indicates that this proposal will not create a truly independent dwelling. The applicant indicates that he believes the annex comprises 16% of the existing Upper Ifold House as a whole. That alone supports a much more substantial curtilage being provided for the annex. When the estate was divided in the 1950s, the accessway tinted pink on the site plan in the officer's presentation was a secondary access for Upper Ifold House. The right-of-way passes a few feet from the front door and ground floor windows of thatched cottage. If this application is approved, this access will be the only access for the annex from the public highway. This will have a material adverse impact on thatched cottage, in respect to which the applicant is not proffering any mitigation. Unfortunately, the applicant has a history of at best pushing planning and listed building controls. A number of past issues are mentioned in the papers and in the comments on this and last year's application. Upper Ifold House is an important part of our parish's rich, historic built environment and demands the fullest protection given by these rules and regulations. If this application is approved, the parish council is fearful that it will become increasingly difficult to prevent aggressive strategies intended to continue to push the limits of these controls, and that such action will only pour more fuel on the difficult community relations which currently exist within this hamlet between the owner of the big house and the remainder of that very close community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So there are no other public speakers on this. So members, I see Councillor Gray. John, would you speak, please?
Thank you. Just let me start. I must disclose that I am a member of the parish council, but I have reserved my position on this issue pending it coming to this meeting. I'd like to draw members of the committee to attention to the previous application that was approved on the 6th of October. It's WA 2020-0372. I think I heard the owner, Mr. St. Albans, say that this is a replacement application, and that's very welcome, because I've been advised by the planning officer that if we approve this more modest application today, the previous approved application would still be valid and would be implementable. There's some significant inconsistencies in the two applications because they try to cover different purposes. We spent some time under the discussions on the 6th of October application 0372 discussing whether this should be an ancillary dwelling or not. And it's been referred to by the parish council and also Mr. Dalden about that issue. But it was discussed, and it was very much thought that it should be an ancillary dwelling to the big house. If we do approve this now, then if I'm right in being advised that the previous application is still valid, then I feel that we should not approve this application. We have to get the situation clarified, and so that we know what we're actually agreeing to and what the extent of that application is trying to achieve. I think there's a balance of opinion here in terms of the ancillary element, the addition that we're trying to make an independent dwelling is in fact a more modern building. It's a more modern part of the house. And we are assured by officers that should this go ahead and be approved as a separate dwelling, that the listed building aspect will be considered if there's any application changes. But my big concern here is on the question of the previous application. And I wonder if officers could come back and tell me the position on that. And perhaps, Mr. Chairman, you would let me come back later.
Absolutely, Councillor Gray. Yes, Kate, could you or someone else comment on Councillor Gray's question?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Gray has correctly understood my advice prior to the meeting that the previous consent from last year could be implemented potentially after a consent, if granted tonight, had been implemented, and that the two could be combined in that respect. But just in relation to that previous application, the reason we gave for the condition in relation to ancillary use didn't relate to a concern about any level of harm to the heritage asset because of a subdivision into two independent dwellings. It more related to the fact that we hadn't performed a proper and full assessment of that application, described as an extension to an annex, against the relevant different considerations that you have when you're creating an independent dwelling, as we've considered in relation to this application. So it is the officer view that the two consents could exist together in that respect.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Thank you very much. I have Councillor Goodridge next. Michael, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We had the advantage, I think most of us on the committee, of viewing this site on our application that was determined on the 6th of October, and it was a very useful site visit. And it was clear on that site visit that the rear garden, in respect of what we're now calling the cottage, had been made some time ago and was being used by the cottage, or it looked as if it had. And it seemed to me on that site visit that the outside facilities which are now being proposed for the cottage were perfectly large enough for the size of what the dwelling house the cottage would now be. I mean, I had two concerns, which I think have both been answered. Firstly, whether the cottage would still remain listed, and therefore we'd get control for any future applications inside or out for listed building. And I'm told that this will still apply, so the cottage will remain listed, which is good. And secondly, it was unclear from the original report, now being clarified in the annex, as to what changes there were to be to the elevations, because it wasn't clear from the original written report what those changes were. Those changes seem to me to be perfectly reasonable and very minor, and I can't remember whether in fact those changes were the same as the extension changes were going to be. But as a reminder, the extension application in October last year was for a very minor extension, and I personally don't have any worries about that small extension happening and the change to make this a separate dwelling. Mention has been made about the land registry, and I'm sure our legal department can confirm it, but I think the owner is doing the right thing. You apply for planning first. If you get planning for a separate dwelling, then you transfer the property to a third party. To do it beforehand would be somewhat counting chickens before, etc. So and the fact that services may currently be, I mean, I don't think it's relevant to us as planners as to whether or not the services have, will be, or are to be separated. Which I would imagine they would want to, when the work is done. But I don't think that is relevant to planning. Therefore, on looking at it and with the benefit of the site visit, I have to say that I am happy with the officer's recommendation. And when I'm told, well, it's been used as a separate dwelling for some time, that underlines my feeling that it is acceptable. So I'm happy to go along with the officer's recommendation, subject to any comments that may come later in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. And now Councillor Townsend. Liz, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. Councillor Goodridge has mentioned the point about the cottage still being listed, so perhaps Kate could just confirm that that would still be the case. And then there was another point raised by one of the speakers about the size and the increase in size, and I just wondered whether Kate could perhaps also touch on that for me, please, and explain perhaps a little bit more about that comment. And then finally, should permission be granted, would it be appropriate to have and I don't think it's mentioned, electrical vehicle charging point as well for this new dwelling? Anyway, those are just 3 points. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. Kate, can you help on those 3 points, please?
Yes, certainly. In relation to the listing, yes, I can confirm that the northern part of the building would remain to be covered by the listing, because it relates to the building rather than the address, as it were. In relation to size increase, there is no size increase proposed with this application. There are no extensions. There is the proposal would be utilising floor space within the roof space and part of the main house at first floor level, but there would be no exterior extensions. In relation to electric vehicle charging points, no, I haven't attached the condition, which was primarily really to a concern that it may not be implementable in the location. So yes, that was my view on it. But if committee felt that it was something which was necessary, we could add that as an additional condition.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Councillor Townsend, anything to add to Kate's comments?
No, that's the fine, Chairman. The only thing is, I probably would like it the electrical vehicle charging point implemented, unless something came up that it wasn't implementable, if you know what I mean, Kate. So we're just assuming it can't be put in at the moment, but perhaps we could say that as a condition that it could be put in, subject to confirmation that obviously the electricity supply there is adequate to implement it.
Yes, I mean, I think
okay, Kate, you can do that.
We could include something within a condition to say, unless otherwise agreed in writing by the planning authority, it shall be provided. And then if there is an issue, our agreement would be needed to suggest that the condition was no longer necessary. So that would be feasible if it's something that the committee thinks is necessary.
Thank you, Kate. And members, if you'll bear that in mind while we run through our other speakers. Councillor Darcy Martin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to revisit something that Councillor Gray said. At the last time we discussed this property, there was an application for an extension. And the crux of the argument seemed to be at the time, and certainly it was the argument I was having with the planning committee, with the planning officers, was this extension, this new bit, part of the whole, or was it separate? And we were absolutely categorically assured that it was part of the whole. And that was crucial because the size of the proposed extension would have been something in the region of doubling of the existing extension. But when it was part of the whole, it only came to about 10% or something. So that to me was critical in it receiving permission. We now move on 6 months, and we're now assured that what was true 6 months ago is absolutely the opposite. So now it's, oh no, it's not part of the whole, it's a completely separate house. Okay, so I'm baffled by this because I categorically asked these questions of the planning officers and was assured that it was definitely all part of the whole. So I'm really puzzled as to how we got to the situation where we've given permission on one basis, and we're now being told, oh no, it's a completely different thing, but the permission that we gave under that basis still remains. I fail to understand it. I'm inclined to go along with what Councillor Gray says, and I certainly agree with what the Parish Council say. That's my view. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Darcy. Did you want any clarification on that from Kate, or perhaps we can leave that till others have spoken? Okay. Councillor Wilson. George, please.
Thank you, Chair. Three things bothered me, but I think Councillor Townsend dealt with the electrical point. The first one that I would like an answer to, I think, is a combination of the two permissions. Would that actually add to the size of the cottage? If they're both in being, you now have an independent dwelling which has got a prior planning permission. Can I have an answer to that one?
Okay, all right, Councillor.
And the second one is, there is a boundary dispute, and I understand that it is not within our remit to decide anything about boundary disputes, but I would like it to be made clear that when we give planning permission, it isn't a license to build until the dispute is settled. Is that possible?
So, Kate, oh, sorry, George. Kate,
yes.
You have a whole list of questions. Good luck.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wilson, for the questions. In relation to whether, with the two consents, the previous one from last year and this one potentially, if it's resolved to grant, yes, it's correct that the previous extension could be used to extend the cottage. To provide sort of further clarification in relation to Councillor Darcy's comments in relation to the previous application, it was clear at that stage that there was a mixed history to the building, but the previous application was submitted as an application for extension to an annex, which is, as we've established, currently being used by the applicant's daughter, i.e. direct family. So on that basis, yes, it's correct that the previous application was considered as an extension to the whole of the building, but notwithstanding that, it wouldn't necessarily be the case that a different view would be taken on the proposal were it, for example, to come forward for permission for an extension to the cottage, because the visual impacts would in effect be the same. So in that respect, there isn't really a concern about a conflict between the consents. In relation to the boundary dispute, Councillor Wilson, you're very much correct that planning permission doesn't give anyone permission to build or do anything else on land which is owned by anyone else. If, for example, there were to be an issue in relation to the boundary dispute at a later date, we would simply need the applicant to confirm how they would satisfy the conditions, particularly in relation to parking. But from the planning perspective, it's very much sound in that regard, and planning permission wouldn't give any permission for doing any permission which would otherwise be required from the owners of the land.
Okay, Kate, thank you. I have two more speakers, and Councillor Gray, I remember that you wanted to come back, but let's deal with first timers first, please. Councillor Gale, Maxine, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I've still got more questions about the previous application and the new application. Listening to what the officers have said and what councillors have said, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact details of the first application, but I gather that it would double the size of what's now known as the cottage, but it would only be a 10% impact extension for the whole house. If this new application separates the cottage from the whole house, they could then build 100% onto the cottage, and then could they apply for yet another application for an increase of 40% on top of that, because that property would then be deemed as being a separate dwelling, in which case that small little cottage on the side of the building would be enormous. Could somebody tell me how that works, please? Thank you.
Kate, can you help Councillor Gale?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the question. In relation to the percentage increase of the dwelling, and I appreciate this is an issue which has caused a lot of confusion in relation to representations. This site isn't in the green belt, it's in the countryside beyond the green belt. And in that respect, the way we apply policy RD2, which is the policy for extensions in the countryside, is different to how we apply it in the green belt. So the test, and not relate, I'm not speaking in relation to this application, just to clarify, in relation to the previous application, the test for any extension is, notwithstanding that it's not proposed here, is not 40%. It's more about the overall impact on the character and beauty of the countryside. So in that respect, whether the building is ancillary or independent doesn't have an impact on the exterior visual extent of an extension. So in that respect, you know, I don't think there's any conflict with the previous plans. In relation to the question about extensions and could they potentially implement, I think the question was, could they potentially implement the consent from last year, having created an independent dwelling, and then request a further extension beyond that? the answer to that would be any extension would be judged from the starting point of the original house, and anything beyond that would be considered on its merits. In this case, the test would always be impact on the character and beauty of the countryside, as well as obviously the listed building considerations. So ultimately, I think we've sort of discussed this issue of independence and ancillary and how it interacts with the historic the consent last year from a number of angles, but ultimately it's not one of the main determining issues in relation to this application. The application is before us for an independent dwelling, and we need to consider it solely on the merits of the application for an independent dwelling rather than any historical factors. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Catherine, you popped your hand up a few moments ago. Is there something you want to add?
I think Kate's covered the point that I was going to cover, Chairman, but yes, just to reiterate that you are not considering this against a test of proportionality, and I think members should take some comfort in not only the countryside policies that are at play here, but also the heritage policies that will come into play in assessing any future applications. So, but I think Kate has covered those points perfectly for you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Catherine. And last of the first-time speakers, Councillor Denis. Kevin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think a lot of the discussion has been as clear as mud, really, trying to work out which part relates to which. But like some of my colleagues, I do have concerns about this. I mean, I was present at the meeting back in October and had that application and that discussion being about the actual annex bit rather than the whole thing. I think it would have been a very, very different discussion and potentially a different result. I do feel a little bit cross at the way that this is being dealt. It almost seems like it's stealth. And my concern is, so you make them into two, and then you look at what's left, and then you add a bit more, and you compare that to what the original size is, so you can increase that quite considerably. But I just feel this has been dealt with by stealth. I think the points raised by Councillor Gray and Councillor Darcy, I think, are valid. I think it would have been a very different decision had we known what the plan was. So at the moment, I'm probably going to go against the officers, but I'll wait and see what my colleagues who've still got their hands up say. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Denis. I see Councillor Else as a first-time speaker. David, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a couple of things. I seem to remember when we considered the previous application, I mean, we've heard talk about having approved 100% extension to it, but I kind of remember it was a very modest single-story sort of porch along the side, similar to what's shown on the plans of the existing one, but that sort of width and just running down the side of it. I don't know where we get 100% from, but so I'm well, as Councillor Denis says, as clear as mud. This is getting more confusing as we go on. I'm also surprised to hear that RD2 is interpreted differently outside of the green belt as it is within. But generally, I even if the extension that we approved back in October was to be added on to this in a year's time or in 6 months' time, I don't think it's made a vast difference to the building, and I think I'm verging on backing up the officers on this one. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Kate, you have your hand up for more advice, please.
Yes, Chair, I just really wanted to reiterate to the committee to avoid any potential confusion. The discussion and debate has been very much around the previous consent and would we have granted it if it was an independent dwelling. But I'd just like to draw members' attention back to the report and the material planning issues in relation to this application. The previous application isn't pertinent in that respect, and in terms of whether or not it could be implemented, the decision has to be taken on the planning merits of this application for an independent dwelling. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kate. And back to you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Am I the last one? Can I come in and do my?
You're the first of the second set. Let me say that.
I mean, what I wanted to stress here is going back, and there's been some very interesting comments. I think one of the things about size, going back to Councillor Cole's thing, is that there was a second story involved in this. It extended over the single story right to the end and extended. But as Kate said, we're not going back to that. The principle for me is, and I don't think that the applicant has intended to do anything untowards on this. He's said that he's put this more modest proposal forward, and he wants to get, he's got good reasons to get an independent dwelling here, and I'm not unsympathetic to that. But the unintended consequences is we have this previous application which is still valid, and I think that that should be removed. If we do approve this, then that other application can be implemented, and the extension on that is pretty significant. Now, I don't know whether it's a valid planning argument, but certainly the applicant didn't intend to build both applications out, and I think that we're wrong not to be able to say that we are happy to approve this, but it's got to be on the basis that the other one is withdrawn. I don't think that's an unreasonable stance to take for both the residents around the area and the applicant. If we can't do that, if the officers are advising us we can't do that, then I'm still of a position of saying I'm not minded to approve this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to come back.
A pleasure, Councillor Gray. Now I have Councillor Wilson and Councillor Darcy. Let me take Councillor Darcy first, and then Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that like Councillor Else, I'm surprised to hear that there's a different interpretation of RD2 within the Greenbelt, because it doesn't say that in the actual document. So I wonder where this came from. And secondly, I'd like to assure that Councillor Else and Councillor Goodridge that in fact the proposed extension was considerable and involved a second story with 3 bedrooms. And so it wasn't just a question of adding a small amount on. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Darcy. And lastly, Councillor Wilson. George, please.
Councillor Gray has said exactly what I was going to suggest. So can I ask the planning officers, is it possible for us to remove the original permission? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Kate?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My answer would be no, that in my view it isn't, and there would have to be a planning reason relating to this application before us for an independent dwelling to do so, and there is no planning reason to do so. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kate. I see no further speakers, so I suggest that we roll to a vote. The motion is to accept this proposal. Maybe have the magic voting machine. Let me remind you, members, that if it's close, I see you, Councillor Townsend. If it's close, I should call for a roll call. Before we start voting, sorry, Councillor Townsend.
Sorry, Chairman, it's just my additional condition, please. Can that be included in the conditions as an extra condition?
Kate, is that's on electrical vehicle charging points? Kate?
Apologies there, I took a while unmuting because my screen had changed to the voting. Yes, it can be included from a planning perspective, and that's the decision for the committee.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Members, if you will now select for or against or abstain.
we've got 4. We've got 7 for, 6 against, and 2 abstains.
Oh, well, that's excellent. Georgina, I'm going to have to call for a roll call vote. Then my apologies, members, but I think we need clarity to make sure that only members have voted on this. Georgina?
Councillor Rivers?
4.
Councillor Elf?
4.
Councillor Cole?
4.
Councillor Cossa?
Abstain.
Councillor Darcy?
Against.
Councillor Denis?
Against.
Councillor Ellis?
Against.
Councillor Gale?
Abstain.
Councillor Goodridge?
4.
Councillor Gray?
Against.
Councillor Hegan?
4. Sorry, 4.
4.
Yes.
Councillor Reid?
4.
Councillor Sadler?
4.
Councillor
4.
Councillor Townsend?
4.
Councillor Wilson?
Against.
It's carried, Chairman.
Thank you, Georgina. Just to clarify, that recommendation is carried. Thank you, members. Moving on then to WA 2021-0185, the cottage. This is Upper Ifold House, Upper Ifold in Dunsfold. The proposal is for listed building consent for internal and external alterations as amended by plans received 22nd of February and 26th of March. All has been done. Members, would you vote for or against this motion?
All 15 have voted. We've got 9 for, 3 against, and 3 abstain. So it's carried.
So that's carried. Excellent. Thank you, members. Moving on now to applications not subject to public speaking. Item 11.1, WA 2020-1651, West Cranley Nurseries and north of Knoll Park between Knoll Lane and Allfold Road, Godalming. The proposal, WA 2020-1651, details pursuant to outline permission granted under WA 2016-2207 Phase 2 for 118 dwellings together with associated car parking, landscaping and open space pursuant to conditions 1, 4, 5, 7, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, 22, 26, 40 and 41. A statement of conformity to the original environmental statement has been provided with this application. Application site at land at West Cranley Nurseries and north of, as I've said before. Patrick Arthurs, you can advise us on this.
Thank you, Chair. Just calling up. Okay. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Okay. I think what I'll do is I will run. It's actually easier to run through Phase 2 and Phase 3 together, even though they're 2 separate applications, as in 2020 and 1651 and 2020 1652. Phase 2 is for 118 dwellings and phase 3 is for 74 dwellings, together with associated car parking, landscaping, open space, pursuant to condition 1 of the outline planning permission. As many of you know, this application was originally reported to committee back in January, where members were minded to defer the application so further consideration could be undertaken of a number of elements, which I'll get onto in a minute and focus on. So just to remind ourselves of the site, so the green area, which is phase A, which is Knoll Park, the area labeled B is actually phase 1, which is presently under construction. And the area which is phase C within the outline is actually phase 2 and 3, which is subject to the reserve matters application that we are considering today. So this is an aerial view of the site. You will see that this is where the former nursery buildings were located. The lakes are located on the northern and the western edge of the site. Phase 1 is at this edge, and this is development happening on the other side of the road. Just to give some context to the site and where it sits, just to the south of the site, and I mean, this is the main road, this is Knoll Road as you travel in. So the first thing you will see as you travel up that road is really this large sort of industrial storage building on the southern side. And this is it from the northern edge and where it is today with the construction compound. And just to give some context that the apartment buildings A and B will be located in this location. So basically when you travel up Knoll Road, what you'll be able to see is maybe they'll be tucking out from the top of above the industrial buildings here and along here. And this is the pedestrian route as well, which runs along the southern boundary of the site and connects into phase 1, and then onto Knoll Park. So this is the site as it was before, with the greenhouse buildings on it, and this is it is today as it's cleared. These water bodies were used to actually provide water for the plants within the nursery building. So they're man-made, but they are to be retained to form a more naturalistic setting as part of the proposals that we will consider today. So this is some images of phase 1, just to show it's the first phase is in the process being constructed. Sale is about to commence on that phase if it hasn't already, within the very near future. And the first phase elements of that are due to be actually completed later in the year. So just to remind us of the outline application, which was approved, this approved 265 dwellings in all, included a part of the benefits of the scheme was the creation of the park, which is known as Knoll Park to most. And following on from that, the different phases. So the phase 1 development that was approved as was the Knoll Park. So part of what we have to consider really is, as part of the condition 1, is really looking at the layout, scale, landscaping and appearance of the development of the phase 2 and 3 site. As guidance within that, the outline included as part of condition, I think it was 3, a set of parameters plans which act as a guide to how the development should come forward. The entrance was approved as part of that application. And there are also a number of leaps and laps located throughout the site. That outline indicated the southern perimeter park, which basically follows the line of the existing public footpath, the retained water bodies, and then the environmental enhancement and landscaping to the edge of that. But basically, the main body of the site was to be developed. And then this parameter plan gives an indication of the height that was considered acceptable across the main body of both phase 1, 2, and 3. The sort of slightly creamier grey areas indicate where the apartment buildings could be located. It was felt at that time that the apartment buildings located behind this existing industrial building to the southern part of the site would be considered the most acceptable location in terms of, it won't be as visible traveling up Knoll Park Road. and within the main body of the site as well, but not on the edge, which was to be lower mass and scale. So the outline and illustrative master plan for phase 2 and 3 is indicated here. Again, this shows the key entrance point is basically a circular route in and out of the site as a cul-de-sac development, for want of a better word, with smaller spaces flowing off that, and again, a focus on the landscape bodies of the south. So the revised master plan that comes before us today has been slightly updated, as you see here, and it very much follows the structure of that master plan that was indicated within the outline. The water bodies are to be retained, areas of landscape around the corner, the edge of the site, creating a circular route in and out of the site, and then there are these sort of more informal play areas running north and south, connecting in through the site as well. So it's quite a permeable site and considered to be of low density. Now, some of the key issues that the members considered asked to be taken away and considered by the ward members in particular, really focused on the nature of the apartment buildings, buildings A, building B, building C, and building D. I'll get onto that in a minute and discuss what the initial building was and where they've got to now. And then the other issue was really trying to break up the mass and bulk of this southern elevation and trying to look at ways of making that slightly less dense and opening up the sort of views onto the southern half. So one of the areas that the applicant looked at was plot number 86, and I'll sort of talk through the nature of the change, but you used to see it was sitting in the middle of the site. So basically, this is the form of building A and B that was considered by the committee back in January. Basically, the comments that, in summary, that the comments that members felt at the time was the mass scale of this building and its architectural appearance was a bit brutal, for want of a better word, and that's something softer and that provided more articulation and was slightly more of Cranley should be considered. So the applicant and the architect went away and considered several options, how the mass of that apartment building could be broken down, how the different architectural elements could be brought in to break up that and add in more vertical elements and break down the horizontality of that building. So through discussion with members, that was considered to be an acceptable solution. I won't suggest that the ward members absolutely loved it, but it was agreed that it was certainly moved in the right direction, that it provided more vertical elements, that the reduction in the darker material with the lighter cladding and the red brickwork and the roof elements provided a softer appearance and one that was more appropriate on that edge. And again, that's the building from the other way, from the sort of southern park, the sort of skirts around the building. And again, it gives a better articulation of the elements to it and gives a better scale overall. That was the feeling. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Play from current slide, sorry. So again, this is a redesign of apartment building C. Again, this is the darker cladding with a flatter elevation initially, and again, this is the breaking it down with more projecting bays, greater articulation within the roof form, different colors within the roof form. So again, the appearance of it is softened, and when you look at it from along the street, this is the internal street on the northern edge of the site. So this gives it a sort of softer appearance, and one where we felt that the articulation was better and it actually set within the surrounding landscape in a more appropriate way. So again, this is plot 86, which was that southern building on the southern site. So it is one of 4 5-bedroom units that sit within this phase. So the architect turned, basically this is the garage block. So they turned the building on its apex. So the shorter edge is overlooking the park, and this is a 1-story element. This is a 1-story element, and this is two-story element that sits along that. And this is how that appears if you're looking at it directly on. So it's really about turning that building on its edge, so reducing the sort of length of facade that was facing onto that park. And then you get the twin building as it retained, and then it falls quickly into sort of a mixture of two-story and story-and-a-half buildings. So again, the edge on that site isn't all tall buildings, so there's a mix. So again, moving on to really reminding ourselves of what the design principles of the build form across the site are. And they're taking various elements of the Cranleigh vernacular. Obviously, the Cranleigh vernacular is a mix of red clay tile roofs, red brick. You get the slate roofs. You get some of the darker wood material, some white ends. You get some gable ends as well, and sort of a mix of roof forms. And again, this is sort of that barn darker material where it gives some context, and it's something we've seen in other developments in Cranleigh as well. So in terms of the housing mix across the site, in phase 2, there's a mix of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedroom units, and the mix of affordable is 43% in this. Phase 2 took up the shortfall of affordable elements that came forward within phase 1, and this is included within an updated planning agreement. And this is where the mix of unit sizes across the site is. So as you come in on the front, it's predominantly 3 bedroom with some 2 bedroom units, and there's 1 4 bedroom unit in the corner, and then you get the apartment blocks, which are a mix of 1 bedroom. This is social rented, 2 bedroom affordable shared equity accommodation. And then you go through, you get a mix of 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and 4 bedrooms with, and in total there are 5 bedroom units in this phase as well. So it's considered, the housing team commented on that originally and said that there was an acceptable mix of housing across it, but they asked for the tenure to be changed. So block 3 originally was for shared equity, and that was mixed. So now block B is shared equity. And actually the housing team were satisfied that that mix across the site was considered appropriate. And again, the mix in phase 3, as you head into the site, it tends to get into the larger units. So there's predominantly 3 and 4 bedroom in this phase as you enter into the lakeside area. And again, that shows the mix and spread across that with the apartment building D at this location. And again, there's a mix of 2, 3, and 4. There's predominantly 4 bedroom as you get towards the lakes. So basically, there are 4 characters in terms of the architectural appearance and form. As you move through the development, the key entrance is the approach. And again, this is the materials here are a mix of brick, hanging tile, and dark boarding. And then you move into the green edges, which are on the north and the south, which tend to be sort of larger buildings, looser grain. And then the lanes, which is within the central area, these are 2, 2.5 story with some movement and articulation along that frontage as you move through. And then the lake views, which are the larger plots on this western edge, which fringes into the countryside. So again, these are some illustrative views as you move through the lanes. This is the key sort of central area as well. And this is the lake edge and the views of it. And some, obviously the landscape strategy is really about enhancing the ecological value of that as well. So again, there's a whole range and variety of 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, and 5 bedroom. I'm not proposing to put them all up here, but there's a mix of materials from the light boarding, the darker boarding, the use of the red brick, the use of the darker boarding. There's a mix of red clay and slate roofing as well. And these are the larger 5 bedroom types that are located on this southern elevation. As in phase 1 that is approved, the architectural style is more modern in its interpretation of the Cranleigh vernacular. They got larger window types that is typically found in some of the new developments, and that's really to take advantage of the views and give it a different form, a different meaning, a different sense of place, which is supported through planning policy. Again, there are no representation. We haven't received any representations on the updated scheme. It wasn't widely, we didn't go out and ask for additional technical responses to the amendments because they weren't felt to be, they weren't technical in the nature to warrant that. So really the determining issues, the principle of development, the residential development, it's established. So what we're looking at here is really it's condition 1, which is really the form, appearance and scale of the building, if that's acceptable and relates appropriately to the indicative parameter plans that act as a guide. Is the mix of housing unit size and affordable acceptable? Our housing colleagues have commented on this, following some amendments, they agree that it is acceptable. Is the design and impact of the buildings considered acceptable? Following some amendments and discussion with the ward members, I'm of the opinion that it now is a position where it hopefully is acceptable and considered. There have been some questions asked in relation to the landscape framework and the biodiversity enhancements across the site. And just to clarify, the landscape framework has been looked at by the tree officer, and he is satisfied that it is appropriate, and that and the Surrey Wildlife Trust have also commented on it in relation to the conditions discharged, not necessarily in relation to this application, and they are satisfied that it is appropriate in the nature and form. I mean, just to be clear, there's 1,877 number of trees to be planted in phase 2 and 3. 94% of the tree and the flora and fauna that is being proposed will be native wherever possible. And let's also be mindful that the scheme also has enabled the creation of an old park, which also brings additional biodiversity and landscape value to the Cranley area. The impact on the residential amenity of the existing residents is considered acceptable in terms of both built distances and overlooking. There's only a couple of small elements in that northern edge, but they're all considered acceptable. The standard of accommodation, both in terms of its space, is acceptable, as the play areas. In phase 2, there are 4 laps and some informal children's play space. Within phase 3, there's a leap and a range of amenity space. All of which are considered acceptable in accordance with the terms of the outline. Issues in relation to waste, cycle and car parking have all been considered and are considered acceptable. Whilst the application itself the reserve matters doesn't really focus on the flood risk and drainage as such, it's important that it has taken into account these factors, and we have had some comments back from the lead local flood authority and from the Environment Agency, both of which have considered that there's some additional information required on the structural detailing of it and the built detailing, but in terms of the overall SUDS approach, it's considered acceptable, which feeds through to the landscape strategy and the built form strategy. The archaeology is also considered acceptable, and the conditions from the outline are in the process of being determined as well at the same time. So in terms of delivery, so phase 1, as indicated, is on sale but for occupation later in 2021. Knoll Park is about to commence, the applicant has confirmed, and with most of that work really commencing within the summer months. Phase 3, the plan is to move directly from phase 1 on to phase 2 and commence in the spring of 2022 with occupation in 23, and phase 3 following on 23 with overall completion in 26. The planning balance assessment overall has indicated that the provision of 118 dwellings in phase 2 and the additional dwellings in 73 in phase 3 is considered appropriate and acceptable, and the recommendation for both phase 2 and phase 3 is for approval with conditions and informatives. Chair, when we get to the decision making, I think we need to vote on them separately, but obviously I'm sure that's something you do anyway. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you very much. Terrific effort there. Well done. Thank you. The recommendation is that permission be granted, but let's move to speakers. I see Councillor Townsend. Liz, please.
Thank you. I've just got a few points to make, and I'm very pleased to see that the apartment buildings have changed, and I think that's a great improvement, as Patrick said, and also the turning around of that very large 5-bedroom house, which makes it a bit more open aspect then down on that edge as well. There were a couple of things from the previous time that it came to us. I know that we mentioned the landscape and ecological management plan, and that specifically the EA had said it didn't include phase 3. And I just wondered if Patrick is able to answer if that's now been sorted out, or whether or not it's covered under a previous permission or not. The other thing is that it says under the phase 2 application that Surrey Wildlife Trust have not objected, and I couldn't actually find the document on the planning portal, and I just would like Patrick to confirm what they did actually say, because it said they wanted some conditions, but I couldn't obviously compare the conditions across because I couldn't find the original document. So perhaps that could be confirmed. On the side of the landscaping, I know that there's condition 11 on both of the applications, and I just feel it's a little bit weak, considering that all of the landscape plans that have been submitted under this application, that perhaps that could be just firmed up to mention, perhaps some of the landscape plans, because it seems to mention the trees, but not specifically perhaps the landscape. And I just wondered whether Patrick could explain why that is, or how that does actually cover the landscape plans. So that's condition 11. And also, I just wanted to make sure, again, I couldn't find the amended plans for the new flatted apartment buildings on the website, on the portal. And I just wanted to make sure that the numbers had been actually updated on condition 1 there with the actual plan numbers on there. I didn't want to be agreeing to something, the wrong plan number, but I couldn't, again, cross-check it because I couldn't actually see them on the new plans on the portal. I think that was it, you'll be pleased to know. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Townsend. Patrick, you're starting for 10.
Yeah, just in reverse. Well, plan numbers, yes, they have been updated, and I've actually asked the applicant just to double check them as well, so everybody's satisfied that they are the correct ones that are referenced within the report. So thank you for that. In terms of Surrey Wildlife Trust, they commented specifically on the conditions application discharge. And apologies, it's very difficult for me to go in and get the exact wording of it right now, but what I can do for Councillor Townsend, I can send you the detail of that, and I can also ask the technician to copy those and put them on the reserved matters as well, just for clarity, so people know what they're saying. Sorry, what was the other one?
About the LEMP, that, and also condition 11, whether that is strong enough to actually encompass all the landscaping plans which have been submitted. I just wasn't really sure that it did, to be honest, Patrick.
Condition 11 within the suggested condition 11 within this application.
Yeah, within both of the applications, it's duplicated within both of the phase 2 and 3.
Yeah, so prior to commencement of development, cross-section details, including the proposed finished ground level surface materials, the construction is submitted to and items with the damage shall be carried in the strict and accordance with the flow detail. Surface material for edging within the root project. This condition came from the tree officer. In order to protect the new trees on the site, and obviously the tree officer made the only comment he did make was that the applicant was proposing quite large new standard trees. And he wanted them reduced in order, because if the larger the standard, the bigger the greater the chance that they won't survive.
I appreciate that, Patrick, but equally there is a separate tree sort of report done, and I think that just refers to that. And bearing in mind, when you look at the application, there are loads of landscape documents out on there, and I don't think they're scooped up in this condition sufficiently. I think it needs to mention about the landscape plans as well as the tree report as well, which is separate. And I'm aware that the tree officer did comment on that. But I would like to see particular reference, and I would like to propose, because I'm not sure whether my condition got brought forward in the previous application, that I would like to propose that this condition is amended to include comment about the landscape plans as well.
Sure. I'm just checking the outline just to check the wording of the landscape plans within the outline, because we don't want to duplicate.
No, absolutely. And that sort of goes back to the LEMP as well, which, where is the LEMP?
So the LEMP has been submitted. So the applicant submitted the LEMP, which condition 20, is it 19 or 20?
I think it's 19 on the outline permission.
Yeah, it is 19 on the outline. So according to this schedule that I have, it was submitted by the applicant on the 23rd of the 10th, 2020, and is currently in the process of being considered. And I know I spoke to the admin clerk who's overseeing it, and I know they've had some comments back on it. I think it was getting to a position where it could be approved. But I can clarify that with you. I know it has been submitted. And I'm just construction environment. The SEMP is 18, 19 is the LEMP. No existing crossing, water course, no I'm just going to check with the wording in the landscape plan to prior to the scheme.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for
sorry
doing this.
for being Indian Blossom. Prior to this, done hereby provide a detailed constitution for moving under a local works to existing trees.
So, Councillor Townsend, we're seeking an amendment here. Is that right?
Well, I would, as long as Patrick says it's not covered elsewhere, I would like the condition 11 to include comment on the landscape plans. But also with regard to the LEMP, and I'm seeking officers' advice on this, I did think previously, and I did bring up in the previous meeting, is that the EA specifically said the LEMP that was produced did not cover phase 3. And I just wanted, and I did ask for clarification on that before, and I was wondering if that had been sorted, because I feel a bit uncomfortable about the absence of the LEMP and then agreeing the reserve matters. So perhaps Catherine could clarify that point for me, whilst Patrick rummages through the conditions. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm rummaging as well, Councillor Townsend, I'm afraid. Yes, Chairman, I was just trying to check there. It does look like we have got those details submitted. Condition discharge, but with regards to these phases. So obviously, pending the outcome of these two applications, then I would think that can probably be approved. There is just some correspondence that I would just need to check. That I unfortunately can't give you an answer right now on for. I can't find the document that would confirm either way, I'm afraid.
Fine.
Okay, so while that's going on, Liz, you'll need a seconder if there is an amendment motion, whatever. Do we have a seconder?
Well,
Councillor Denis, you're second, right? Okay. just so that we're ready to go when we have to go.
Yeah, I mean, we can very easily just, to give Councillor Townsend satisfaction, we can very easily include a condition to say that all development must be undertaken in accordance with the approved landscape plans. If it's not already within, I can't see it. You're absolutely right. Kate, Catherine, you're going to say something.
Yes, Chairman, if I may, could I suggest then that you include it on the plan numbers condition for this application, Patrick?
Yeah.
Reference to it on the plan numbers condition, Councillor Townsend, that would tie the development to those details. So
for both the phases, please, that would be great. And so do I have a seconder for both phases, please?
Yeah, so I think Catherine's absolutely right. So all of the approved plans include all of that landscape detail. So the master plan, the master plan for both phase 2 and phase 3, as we've seen earlier, included all of that landscape detail and within the sections, etc., and those other plans. So no demolition goes with the approved plans, no material variation of these plans, no demolition will be done to ensemble material using square footage. So again, no development. So condition 3, I suppose, no development shall take place until samples of the materials to be used in the construction of the external surfaces of the development of areas of hard standing. So again, all proposed walls, fences, or other means of enclosure shall be erected prior to the development. So condition 4 is the walls and the enclosures of serving bathrooms. I just hereby applied. Details of electric charging prior to the LEAP permitted post installation inspection prior to the LEAP. Condition of the commencement of the cross section stages including proposed finish levels. Sorry, condition 12 prior to the drains and soak wires. Margin dwelling details for the term the dwellings have been updated in the requirements of the order as well.
Perhaps, Chairman, could I suggest that we if I've got a seconder for both, that we include the landscape plans as a condition, unless obviously if we find that they have been duplicated elsewhere, I'm quite happy for them then to be removed. But perhaps that would be a simpler approach.
Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, sorry, I just need a bit.
Dean has seconded both, so I would suggest that's an admirable way forward.
Fine.
And then the final point on the LEMP, do we need to put something in here that's subject to the acceptance of the LEMP, or is that covered elsewhere then? Thank you.
From my perspective, I think it is already covered within the existing condition 19. So I think that would be a doubling up of the condition. So I don't think it's appropriate. I think that level of control is already within the existing condition.
Thank you, Patrick. So just my one proposal then for the landscape plans.
Sure.
If we could vote on that, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm very, very happy to include that. I'm also keen to note that we have a few other speakers. It's always tempting to, when we have an amendment like this, we should really go through and complete that amendment. But I think in this case, I'd like to hear from Martin Darcy, Councillor Darcy, and then Councillor Denis and Councillor Reid, bearing in mind the amendment already on the table. I know that's a bit backwards, but let's see if we can do that quickly. Councillor Darcy.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually was going to mention that. So condition 15 deals with the preliminary ecological appraisal dated November the 2017. And that I wasn't able to find the copy of that document when I was looking through the papers, but hopefully the LEMP replaces that. So ideally that is dealt with that. I also noticed that conditions 12 and 13, the reasons for them were wrong, or seem to be transposed possibly. That's just a side issue. The main point I wanted to make was sustainability matrix. I think I probably did this last time, but I thought I'd go through it again, which is part of the design and access statement. And it's very disappointing. The 7 headings, and the one I wanted to draw your attention to was the energy strategy, given that we're in a climate emergency. Essentially, what is being offered here is the absolute minimum. For example, it says a fabric first approach will be taken to the energy strategy. Well, it doesn't give any figures, doesn't give any details of what it means by this. So, I mean, that's just words, isn't it? What do they mean by that? What level of fabric approach are they going to have? Are they going to be is it going to be up to passive house level, or is it just going to be the basic building regs? It says, for example, that some balconies and terraces are south facing to maximize solar gain. Well, I'm sure they are, but that could happen purely by accident. You know, how many? What percentage? So this appears to meet minimum requirements without actually going beyond any of them. So I find that really disappointing, and it's some of the other design things have been improvements from the Stalinist approach that they took before. They've slightly broken it up a bit, which is welcome. But I think how they're building them and how they relate to their performance in terms of energy efficiency, to me, that's very significant and important, even something you're building in 2021 or even later. You know, and I think that needs to be taken a lot more seriously than it appears to be at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Darcy. Patrick, may I ask a comment specifically on that detail? That doesn't seem.
I mean, I think that's certainly a comment we can take back to our friends in policy for them to direct where the policy review comes up. The application doesn't have, obviously we are considering the application with the current policy basis that we have and in accordance with the current guidelines, and it meets these. So obviously from a planning perspective, we can't enforce more on the development than is required by policy and the standards at this time. But certainly we can feed your comments back to our colleagues in the policy team, and they will obviously consider that as new plan policy comes forward.
Thanks. Councillor Darcy, are you okay with that approach?
Well,
at this stage,
I've got no choice really. I mean, I understand that it's what the regs allow or what they make you do. My point really is that they should be doing more than the minimum, and they shouldn't expect kudos because they're doing the minimum, because that's just what they have to do.
Thanks, Councillor Darcy. I think your point has been well made. Councillor Dinas, Kevin, please.
Thank you. I'll be quite brief. Small observations. Great to see was it 1,877 trees being planted. It would be good if they're more than about 2 inches in height when they're planted. You know, I've gone to recent developments and you've almost got to get on your knees to see the actual trees and plants that they've done. You know, they'll take 50 or 60 years to get to any height. So it just would be really good that they're encouraged to do a decent sized tree. I just want to make 2 observations about the road, and I know we're not talking about access or anything like that, but we're talking about Orfold Road. So when you come out of where this site will be and turn right, so you're going towards the 281, you have to dodge all the potholes that have been caused by the lorries coming up the road anyway. And I've really got concerns, so when we're doing even more building with more lorries, more construction, that road is going to become almost undrivable. And as quick as you get a pothole filled, there's another 2 or 3. But also, when you come out of this site and turn left, so you're going towards Elmbridge Road, we have this little chicane and a give way. But as you approach it from the site towards the Elmbridge Road, you almost haven't got enough time to see any cars coming from the Elmbridge Road. It's such a poor design. And I don't know whether Patrick is able to speak to them, because although you're doing low speeds, it's actually quite dangerous and very, very poorly designed. And I think with another load of lorries and eventually more houses, that's going to be a bit of an issue. It's going to end up like the bridge in Elmbridge Road, where often it used to get to fisticuffs in the middle, and eventually they had to put traffic lights. It's just an observation to Patrick. It's not a good road. Cranley Brick and Tile, they actually had a condition that they had to keep the road maintained in a reasonable state. And I just wonder why we never put that condition in since. Are we able to on this? I'd like some advice because it's just getting worse and worse, Patrick. Thank you, Chair.
Patrick?
I think this application as a reserve matters is really in focusing internally on the design and the layout and the form. I think when it comes, and thank you, Councillor Dean, this is a point well made. It certainly comes when we're considering applications, either an outline or full applications, that an additional payment, if that is allowed, obviously we have to work within the SIL regulations as well, but if there are particular highways, off-site highways issues that have been identified by the Highway Authority, then I see no reason why that can't be included within the planning agreement for an updated improvement to that. But obviously that would need to feed in through SIL as well. So within the nature of this application, off-site highway works that haven't been taken into account within the outline, it can't be considered as part of this, but it's certainly something that I'm sure the team leader can take away and can ensure can be considered in other applications. But thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Right. That's all I wanted.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Councillor Dennis. And lastly, Councillor Reid. Ruth, please.
I've got a few comments to make about the previous application that we looked at, and the mediation that's been, media work that's been done. And then I would like to comment on a couple of the conditions. So I'm going to start off by saying that there is a design statement on file, but I am very pleased with the efforts that have been made by the officer, Patrick Arthurs, and the developer to listen to our committee and thank them for all the work they've done between the last time we looked at these applications and now to resolve the issues that have been raised. I think Councillor Townsend covered most of the building parts and the wildlife issues. I'd also like to make a public comment to thank Councillor Else for deferring this application. Much more in detail. So, Else. I'm happier with the changes that have been made to the development, especially the materials. And I particularly disliked the black elements, but having walked it along the footpath, I noticed that there are black facades to some of the previous approved developments when I was not elected and I hadn't been on this committee. And so that's on the conscience of the previous planning people. I was especially pleased with the blocks of flats. I look forward to seeing the finished development. I feel that it is a much better design and layout now. And I think too that we should always consider whatever size of buildings, whether they're going to be socially rented, shared ownership, whatever, the design is of great importance. We shouldn't skip that because if you live in a building that looks nice, that's people respect it and take much more care of it. Now the the only proviso I've got, I don't know whether, and Patrick Arthurs can probably answer this, there is mention of asbestos on the site, especially nearest the village, on the site nearest the Oldfold Road, on buildings that have still to be demolished. And I was wondering if there is a condition in that for the safe removal I know you have to do it by law, but I'd just like that confirmed by one of the officers, please. Condition 15 mentions the footpath 393. I walk this very often, and it does say that it should be resurfaced. Now, and that it is actually crossing the countryside. So I don't know whether there should be, you know, very special surfaces. And I'm sure that you will talk to the countryside officers about this, because it is very important that we are linking the parkland area and the trees and the shrubs and the gardens of the people who are going to occupy this with wildlife that need to find a corridor through. And I'm sure that people will consider the surface or the resurfacing of footpaths with that in mind. I also wanted to talk about condition 11 about trees and the use of native species. Particularly, I have mentioned ornamental trees that are native, particularly flowering ones like a hawthorn. We are talking about the edge of the countryside, and I hope that there will be some softening on the southern side with ornamental trees like the hawthorn and like wild plum, which would soften those edges, because I still feel that there are not enough trees in the development or on that edge. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Reid. You made quite a number of observations there. Patrick, could you advise us, Councillor Reid in particular, on her points and perhaps on her wishes about trees as well? How far can we go down that track? Patrick, you muted, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Reid. The applicant would like to thank all the thanks to the local ward members for engaging in the redesign process as well. They certainly found it helpful from their perspective. In relation to the contamination, there is a condition within the outline, which is number 33, which deals with the contamination issue. And this is being discharged. In relation to the trees, actually within the application submission, there is quite a detailed landscape proposal within the design nexus statement as well as the landscape plans. And that includes quite detailed information in nature of the landscaping in terms of variety of species, etc. So I think a lot of that information has already been submitted, and I'll try and guide Councillor Reid to that information. I know it's quite dense in terms of what has been submitted and in relation to some of the other submissions as well, but I can certainly try and guide you to that if that would help at some point.
Thank you, Patrick. Councillor Reid, is that okay with you? Sorry, Ruth, you're muted.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Patrick. And then there was one more thing I wanted to mention that Councillor Denis was saying about the state of the road, and I completely agree with that, but it isn't the only development that's coming out at that point. I think there are at least 3 other exits on the opposite side of Oldfold Road. You'll probably remember.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Reid. Councillor Townsend, I hope we're in a position now to wind up with your amendment so we can move rapidly to a vote. My apologies, councillors, for not giving you a break before this application. Put it down to my inexperience, but I hope we can have 5 minutes after we've completed this application. Councillor Townsend.
Yes, I nothing more than just to say, can we vote on my amendment to the conditions so that it doesn't get lost? Thank you, Chairman.
We need to vote on it, like with the charging points. It's kind of a change to the conditions. It's not a new condition. Do you think we actually need to vote on your condition?
I did have a proposal, and we did propose it in second, so I assumed then from that it needed to be voted on. but I'm quite happy for it to just flow through, Georgina. Thank you very much.
And Georgina, if you're happy with it flowing through to a vote, including this amendment, I'm sure everybody else would be happy too. So at that point, Kim, maybe we can roll the voting machine, please.
Just to be clear, you're voting on phase 2 to begin with, and then phase 3, the second vote.
I haven't got the polling screen up on mine. All I can see is Patrick's lovely face. I can't see can't see the polling screen.
How would you like to vote, Councillor Earls? How are you voting, Councillor Earls?
4.
4. Thank you.
Right, in that case, we've got 14 for, none against, and 1 abstention, so it's carried.
Excellent. Thank you, Georgina. So that motion is carried.
And then phase...
Patrick, yes, just help a poor chairman here who is new to the job.
Sorry,
we're not talking about the next application here, are we?
We are. In effect, phase 2 was application 6.1 and 5.1. What one are we doing? Yeah, and then the next one is 5.2. Is that correct, Georgina?
B2, yes.
Yeah.
So we can take. So we've taken B1.
Yeah.
And that has passed.
Yeah.
And we can now take B2, which
is phase 3.
To my mind, the next application. We can vote directly on that.
Yes.
I'm very happy with that. So members, if you would vote on that, please.
We have 13 for, 1 against, and 1 abstention. So it's carried again.
Excellent. Thank you, Georgina. And that takes us to the end of what we have before us, I believe. So that is the end of the meeting. Am I right, Georgina?
There's nothing else.
So in which case, we don't need to have our 5-minute rest. I can grant you an even longer, probably 2-week rest from planning. Officers, thank you very much for your attention to detail and your help and support of this committee, and especially Georgina, to keep us on